meeting to order and ask Ms. Wells for a roll call.
Mike Marks,
Here.
Kathy Kubish,
Here.
Alon Huerta,
Here.
Jesse Lugo, Jesse Lugo, Bruce Dawson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum. Mr. Lugo is on the line. I just think he's having trouble unmuting. Mr. Lugo? Mr. Lugo, can you try to unmute yourself to answer roll call, please? I can see that you're trying to talk. Are you there? His icon is flashing. He's hearing us and he's present. We do have a quorum, but Mr. Les, can you confirm how we should proceed since Mr. Lugo?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, now we can hear you.
Okay,
Mr.
Brendan,
Lugo,
I'm here.
thank
Okay.
Mr. Marks, we have all 5 members present. Thank you.
Okay, very good. This is Michael Marks, the chairman of the board today, and I have a few comments I want to read for the benefit of the public, and I'll start with that right now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the regular meeting of the City of Tucson Board of Adjustment. This meeting is being recorded, and by joining the meeting, you are giving consent to that recording. We have 2 hearings on the agenda today, plus a matter under other business. After each case is introduced, staff will present its staff report. Board members may then ask staff questions. After that, the applicant or his or her representative will have time to speak. Other people, first those in favor and then those in opposition, will also have an opportunity to speak. The applicant will then be given an opportunity for rebuttal. Throughout this period, board members may ask questions of the applicant and other speakers. When all of that testimony is completed, the board will close the public hearing, discuss the matter, and then vote on a motion made and seconded by the board members. All of those who wish to speak will be asked to first state their name and address for the record. All of those wishing to speak other than the applicant should indicate that wish and your name and address in the chat feature. All presentations today must be directed solely to the board and not to staff or members of the audience. And all must be related to the case at hand and not to any other matter. For those who wish to speak, we ask that you be brief and to the point. Repetition of testimony already given by other witnesses is not necessary. If necessary, I will invoke a time limit for all speakers. Please remember that all testimony given today must be given under oath. And a reminder, please be sure to mute yourself and turn your camera off unless you are addressing the board. The decision of the Board of Adjustment may be appealed to the Superior Court of Pima County by filing a complaint for special action with the Pima County Superior Clerk's Office within 30 days of the board's decision. For additional information on this filing process, please contact the Superior Court Clerk's Office or an attorney after today's public hearing. At this point, I'm going to ask city staff to raise their right hands, and I want to ask, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Did I hear that from all city staff members?
I do.
I do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And I will be asking that of each person that speaks as we go in through the hearings. I would normally turn to the staff at this point and ask for his or her staff report on the first case. But given information that was presented in the study session and then repeated in the executive session, which I want to entertain a motion from the board on suspending the rules so that we can take the items on the agenda out of order and take the Folsom case first prior to the PEP matter. Is there a motion by a board member to that effect?
Jesse Lugo, so moved.
Is there a second?
Alon Wilson, so
Kathy
moved.
Kubish, second.
Is there any objection?
No.
Okay, so hearing no objection, the rules are suspended, and we will take item 2 on the agenda first in our hearing. And so I will at this point turn to Mr. Castro and ask him for the staff report for that case.
Mr. Chair, just for point of clarification, are you referring to case C10-21-10? Or were you referring to the other business item?
I'm referring to C10-21-10. And only that item at this point.
Mr. Marks, we are asking that you take the other business item first.
Even prior to the,
Yes, sir.
okay. Well, I have no problem with that. And so I apologize for not hearing that correctly the first time. Then, and let me get my agenda up. I would like to ask the board members again for a motion to take the other business item, other business A item out of order and to suspend the rules to hear that item first.
Jesse Lugo, so moved.
And is there a second?
Kathy Kubish, second.
Is there any objection? And hearing no objection, the motion passes unanimously. And so, Mr. Castro, do you have any preliminary comments on the other business item that we just dealt with?
I do not have any information on this, Mr. Chair. It is case C10-21-09. It's the TEP case, which is an appeal of a zoning administrator determination pertaining to UDC section 5.5.4.b. This business item is for a request for a continuance, a 6-month continuance, and we're looking for action from the board to approve that.
Okay. And is this a matter that we would need any input from the petitioner, or should we just take action at this point?
Mr. Marks, the petitioner is present to make that request of you.
Okay. Well, then let me ask for the petitioner to identify him or herself, and I think I see that it's a him. Could I ask you to raise your right hand, and do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
And could you state your name and if you're representing TEP, your business address?
Sure. My name is Jeffrey Gross. I'm with the law firm of Barry Riddell. 6750 East Camelback Road in Scottsdale, 85251. Can you hear me okay?
I do, very clearly.
And as you say, I'm representing Tucson Electric Power.
Okay, and so can you speak to the request, which is the portion of the extension or the continuance? And what is the purpose of the continuance? And what is the extent of the continuance in terms of duration?
Yes, thank you. Chairman, members of the board, as you know, as you've heard from Mr. Castro, this matter, the substance of this matter involves an appeal from a zoning administrative determination involving undergrounding of transmission lines. There is a hearing set for December 15th. The purpose of my appearing before you today is to ask for a 6-month continuance in advance of that hearing. The underlying reason is that teams from TEP and the city have been meeting, are continuing to meet, and will be meeting in the future to discuss potential ways to resolve this matter without the need for a board hearing at all. The status of the discussions is that they need additional time to continue negotiations. We understand that the city agrees that a continuance is appropriate to allow those discussions to continue. Granting a continuance now will not only facilitate those discussions, but relieve both sides from the burdens of the notice and posting requirements in this case for the December 15th hearing. That could, under the circumstances, be quite onerous. So I believe both sides thought it made sense to come to you now and ask for this continuance. And it is 6 months. And why 6 months? Well, one potential option that is being considered is to modify the language in the UDC that gives rise to this dispute. And only the city council can do that by text amendment to the UDC. And because of it will take discussions, it will take drafting of the new text amendment, it will take notice to the public. That could take 6 months or even more. And the impact of the modification of language could go beyond this matter involving this particular project. So the parties are being very careful in what they are considering, and that does take time. The UDC allows the board to grant continuances more than 45 days with the applicant's consent, and of course we're consenting because we are the applicant. The board rules, Rule 7, if you want to get specific, Rule 7, point D, capital D, point 3, point small d, and small e, provide that a continued case not brought back to the board within 3 months is deemed withdrawn and must be brought as a new case. The city interprets that as limiting a continuance to 3 months, and that's just simply not enough time to hopefully get this resolution done. We disagree, by the way. We think that only applies to cases that are continued indefinitely without a deadline, and if they're not brought back by the applicant, then they're deemed withdrawn and have to be refiled. But it really doesn't matter because in this case, Board Rule 7J allows a rule to be suspended upon the concurring vote of 4 members, as long as the rule that's being suspended is not contrary to the UDC, to state law, or other administrative rules. The 3-month provision that we're asking to be suspended is not set by state law or the UDC. Neither one of those sets limits on the length of a continuance. So the 3-month period may be suspended, and in this case, we think it's good cause to do so, since giving the parties at least 6 months to continue discussions while the appeal is on hold could facilitate a full resolution and take the burden away from the board and the city of this hearing. Our understanding is that the city does not oppose a 6-month continuance. So what we're asking for is really two things. One, grant a continuance of the December 15th hearing, and two, to the extent necessary, suspend the rule governing the 3-month period and grant the continuance for 6 months. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
You know, I think that was very clear, and given the information that we've been provided, I think, well, at least speaking for myself, I understand your comments. And certainly I want to turn to the other board members, which I'll do in a second, and make sure that they understand your comments and ask if they have any questions. But I want to make a statement and just get your confirmation. And really, this is for the benefit of all those that are a part of this Zoom meeting who may be possibly confused by this, and that is that the project that relates to this time extension is the project on Campbell Avenue and is unrelated to the project that is before the board today in the form of a hearing, a variance hearing, which is related to Grant Road or
Silverbelt.
Silverbelt Road, forgive me. So that is correct, is it not?
And I apologize, Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right for not making that distinction. I have not been involved in the Silverbelt case, so I wasn't sensitive to that issue. So you are correct.
Okay, thank you. And stand by. I do have one question for staff or the city attorney, and that is it correct that this is not a public hearing? This is a matter between the board and the petitioner, and so we do not open this up for input from the public. Is that correct or not?
Chairman Marks and board members, that is correct. This is not set for a public hearing today. It is only set for the board's ruling on the motion.
Okay, so then, given that, I want to turn to the board members and ask if any of them has a question for the petitioner.
Mr. Chairman,
Kathy,
Mr.
question.
Chairman,
Yes.
this is Howard Baldwin. I can't stand silent on this.
Well, but
I represent opposition.
You're
I
gonna have to.
opposition to this, and I demand to be heard.
yeah, I'm sorry, I can't recognize you if this is not a public hearing.
Oh, boy, I'll tell you, there's no limit to the chicanery of the city and TEP. This is disgusting.
Well, I apologize to you for
Absolutely disgusting.
I literally don't have the ability to turn you off, but I don't want to hear from anybody other than a petitioner unless it's a public hearing. So I will only be talking to the board members at this point and asking any of them if they have any questions. And I didn't hear any before, but I was interrupted. And I take it there are no questions from any of the other board members. Assuming that to be the case, is there any board member that wants to make a motion to approve or disapprove? But if the motion is to approve, there has to be an element of the motion to suspend the rules to allow for an approval of the duration requested in excess of 3 months, which that time period being 6 months. So is there a motion of any kind on the part of any board member?
Jesse Lugo, so moved.
And could you be specific? Is that to approve or deny?
That's to approve.
And is the approval to include the suspension of the rules so that the extension or the continuance could be 6 months?
That is correct.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
I second. Alon Lewis, second.
Okay, I've got a couple of seconds. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. I don't hear any, therefore, I assume we have a unanimous vote. And the motion is approved to approve the continuance up to 6 months. And that completes that matter. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that having been dispensed, we want to take C10 2110 next.
Jesus.
And so I want to ask staff, did we approve suspending the rules already so that we can move into C10 2110?
Mr. Marks, this is Roy Lusk. Yes, you did.
Okay, so then I want to turn to staff and ask for the staff report for that item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. The first case is C10-21-10, Polson Residence, New Carport Addition. Kim Polson, 1328 East Elm Street, R2 zoning. The applicant's property is an approximately 7,500 square foot lot that's zoned R2 residential and is developed with a single family residence and 2 detached accessory structures. The applicant is proposing to replace the existing carport attached to the detached garage with a new carport. The applicant is requesting the following variance. 1, to allow the combined total gross floor area of all accessory structures 200 square feet or larger to exceed 50% of the combined total gross floor area of the residence, all as shown on the submitted plans. The engineering section of Planning and Development Service Department has no objection or adverse comments. Planning and Development Services staff has no objections to the applicant's requested variance, subject to the following condition. A, carport is not to be enclosed. It is the opinion of staff that there are special circumstances applicable to the property that granting of the variance would not be detrimental to public welfare or injurious to other property or improvements in the neighborhood in which the property is located, and that the variance requested is the minimum needed to afford relief and the least modification possible of those UDC provisions which are in question. To date, we have received a total of 2 written approvals and 0 written protests. For the record, board members have been provided a copy of the submitted comments. Mr. Chair, members of the board, this concludes staff's presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Speaking for myself, I do not have any questions. I want to ask board members, do any of you have a question for Mr. Castro at this point?
Kathy Kubish, no questions.
So hearing no questions from any other board member, I'd like to invite the petitioner to the front, to the stage, figuratively speaking. And once I see his or her face on the screen, I'd like to swear him or her in.
This is Kim Polson. I'm the petitioner. I'm sorry I don't have a camera.
Oh, you don't have a camera. Okay, well, you see me though, right?
Yes, I do.
I'm raising my right hand. I'm asking you to raise your right hand. And do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And can you state your name and your address for the record?
My name is Kim Polson. Address is 1328 East Elm Street, Tucson, Arizona.
Okay. Could you, well, this is your opportunity to speak and to add anything you think might be pertinent.
I think you guys have covered it pretty good. Mark's done a good job. So, I mean, I'm just changing a carport.
Okay. So if that completes your comments, Are you in agreement with the proposed condition that staff has presented? That is, that the carport not be enclosed?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I want to ask the other board members if any of them have a question at this point for the petitioner. Sounds like there are no questions. And so I will close the hearing and turn to the board members and ask for any discussion, or if one board member is ready for a motion to approve or deny the request in front of us. And I would urge you to make reference to the template provided to us by staff with respect to a potential motion.
Mr. Chair, this is
Yes.
Alon Huerta.
Mr.
I would
Warner.
like to make a motion. I move that we grant the following variance in case C-10-2110 subject to the following conditions: that no carport be enclosed. Evidence present to the board shows that there are special circumstances which were not self-imposed, which are applicable to the property and support the granting of the request variance as set forth in staff report in pages 2, 3, and 4, and findings 1 through 7. The variance with the conditions that we have imposed will not be materially detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to other property improvements in the neighborhood, and is the minimum necessary to provide relief.
Very good, very good, good. I would like to ask, is there a second to that motion?
Jesse Lugo, second.
Is there, well, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. We're hearing no nays. The motion passes unanimously. The request is hereby approved, subject to the condition recommended by staff. So that is all for that item. And at this point, I want to move to the item that is listed in the agenda as number 1, and ask staff ask Mr. Castro if he can present the staff report for that case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. The next case is C10-21-08, Tucson Electric Power Pole Relocation and Modification, Silverbelt Road, Scenic Corridor Zone. The applicant is proposing to both relocate and modify existing power poles and add new poles and service lines above ground in the right-of-way along both sides of Silverbelt Road, a designated scenic route. The project area is along Silverbelt Road, starting approximately at the intersection of Gorret Road and continuing north approximately to the intersection of El Camino del Cerro. The applicants are requesting the following variances. 1, to relocate and modify power poles and service lines above ground within a scenic corridor. And 2, to install new poles and service lines to be located above ground within a scenic corridor, all as shown on the submitted plans. In related plan reviews, the engineering section of Planning and Development Services Department has no objection or adverse comments. Sections of the Silverbelt Road right-of-way are within the Federal Emergency Management Agency Flood Zone A, which is a 100-year flood event noted area. As all power poles would be within right-of-way, floodplain use permitting would be under purview of the Department of Transportation and Mobility. Historic preservation. See the letter provided by the City of Tucson's Historic Preservation Office attached to the staff report. In summary, the letter states that the recently discovered resources are considered eligible for the National Register due to their significance and potential to yield information, and that it's the position of the city's Historic Preservation Office that these archaeological resources are significant and should remain undisturbed to the extent possible. The variance to allow the TEP lines above ground should be granted. The Design Review Board. Zoning regulations require requests for alterations to the Scenic Corridor Zone criteria to be reviewed by the Design Review Board for recommendation to the Board of Adjustment. Case number DRB-21-18 was reviewed on October 22nd and continued to November 5th. At the November 5th meeting, the DRB recommended approval of the requested variances subject to the following conditions. 1, a multi-use path was to be improved with 50% shade as measured at noon on June 21st. 2, roadway improvement project to budget 1% for public art to improve the corridor. 3, artists and neighborhoods to work together to strategically place the public art. And 4, drinking fountains for people and dogs to be placed along the multi-use path. Planning and Development Services staff has no objection to the approval of the applicant's requested variances, subject to the following condition. A, coordinate with the Pima County Office of Sustainability and Conservation on the location of the poles to minimize disturbance and avoid damage to potential cultural resources. And B, applicant to remove all de-energized power poles and associated infrastructure prior to Phase 2 completion. It is the opinion of staff that the granting of the variances will not constitute a grant of special privileges inconsistent with the limitations upon other utilities in the vicinity and will not be detrimental to public welfare or injurious to other property improvements and will not substantially diminish or impair property values within the neighborhood. As of 10 a.m. today, we have received a total of 2 written approvals and 163 written protests and 108 off the map. The approvals received represent the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office and the Tohono O'odham Nation. In summary, the letters state that the office supports the identification and avoidance of prehistoric archaeological sites, which are considered to be traditional cultural properties to both tribes. Denial of the variance would result in a 30 to 40% increase in ground disturbance. In summary, the protests received cite that the requested variances are a condition brought upon TEP by selecting the location for its project and that the granting of the variances would be awarding a special privilege. In addition, property values, wildlife, and scenic views would be negatively impacted due to the placement of poles and wires along Silverbelt Road. For the record, board members have been provided copies of the submitted comments. Mr. Chair and members of the board, this concludes staff's presentation. We'd be happy to answer any questions.
This is Michael Marks. I'd like to ask if you have counted the number of people who are here that wish to speak. Do you know that number?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, so everyone who has submitted a comment and that has requested to speak at the public hearing, that information is submitted.
But I'm asking, do you know what that number is? How many we anticipate hearing from today?
No, Mr. Chair, I don't have that number.
Okay. And have you gotten any information from any of the neighbors as to whether they are a part of an organized effort such that there might be an individual that is coordinating this and could speak in kind of as a facilitator for the neighbors?
Mr. Marks, Mrs. Denise Baldwin has indicated she wishes to speak, and I know that she is on the board of the neighborhood association.
Okay.
So she was in attendance at the DRB, and I believe she has worked with her neighbors to coordinate.
Okay, that's Denise Baldwin. Okay, so I'll call upon her once we get to that stage. Okay. Surprisingly, I don't think I have any questions for staff in terms of the substance of the request. I want to turn to the board and ask, are there any members that have a question of staff at this point?
Yes.
Mr. Marks?
Well, I heard, who did I hear first?
Bruce Dawson.
Okay, Bruce, why don't you ask your questions and we'll go to Ms. Kubish then after.
Yes, it may be that if this runs in excessive time, we do have a quorum, but if I may have to leave to pick up my wife at some point, but that would leave only 4 members.
Yeah, I understand, and this is really an important point for the petitioner and the neighbors, and that is, first, it should be understood that a quorum is the number 4, and so any motion made has to be carried by 4 members of the board. And currently, we have 5 members present. If one member leaves early prior to the vote, we will have to have a unanimous vote, well, to approve or to deny. And that does put more so the petitioner in a position of uncertainty. And under those circumstances, and I hate to be in a position of having to say this because we've continued this matter already once, but the petitioner could elect to request another continuance such that to a point when we have more members present. But if not, we just have to deal with the fact of the numbers that we have and move forward on that basis. Mr. Dawson, do you know about what time you'll be leaving?
Yeah, it could be somewhere more like towards 4 o'clock.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, well, thank you for bringing that to our attention, and we'll have to deal with that as we go forward. Ms. Kubish, have you got a question for staff?
Yes, Mr. Marks, I do. In regards to the stipulation that water fountains be put in along the way, I'd like to know if this is going to require its own archaeological survey or how the water would be pumped in to these stations. It seems like quite a bit of line might have to go in for that.
I think you're referring to the recommendation of the Design Review Board, which did include, if I recall correctly, a condition that there be water fountains spaced so much, what have you. That being a condition to their recommendation for approval. But at this junction, we have a recommendation from our staff that does not include that condition. But if you still want to pursue clarification with staff as to how that could get worked out in the event that there was a condition by this board, we can ask staff if that's what you'd like.
That is correct. I'm wondering whether I'm wondering how the pipes would go in, whether they would be pumped from neighborhoods, whether they would follow the line of the new right-of-way, if this would require a separate permitting process.
This question is not about the power poles. This motion we're supposed to be discussing is about the power poles, not water fountains and water lines.
Okay, please, one at a time.
Who is that?
And so that what you're referring to is condition 4 in the Design Review Board's recommendation that there be drinking fountains for people and dogs to be placed along the multi-use path. And we can take one or two ways with your question. And one is, given that staff has not recommended that this condition be included in a final decision, we could suspend that to a point when this may come out. If hypothetically you wanted to make a motion when this was over, that would include that condition. Then we would have to get clarification from staff as to whether that was workable or not. But at this point, that's a moot question, in my opinion. If you want staff to enter into that, we certainly can have them do that.
Mr. Marks, in the interest of moving this along, I will withdraw the question. It is a question, but I will withdraw it at this time.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Do you have any others?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. And how about any other board member? Are there any other questions for staff? Hearing none, I will now ask the petitioner to come forward. Okay. I presume you, and I see your name here, Kevin O'Brien of TEP. Would you raise your right hand, and do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? You're appearing frozen. Do you hear me?
I do hear you, yes.
Could you raise your right hand? And do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
I do, yes.
Very good, thank you. Could you repeat your name for the record and state your business address? And then could you acknowledge that there may be, the numbers of board members we have relative to the number required to carry the motion, and if you want to go forward today or not.
Yes, sir. My name is Kevin O'Brien. I'm an environmental land use planner with Tucson Electric Power. My address is 3950 Irvington Road. That's Tucson, Arizona, 85714. I do understand the numbers for board members as it relates to the quorum and the potential that there be only 4 members present towards the end of this presentation, and we would proceed with a vote at that time with 4 members.
Okay, very good. Why don't you proceed with your presentation?
All righty. Just to confirm, can you see my screen?
Mm-hmm, I do.
With the title slide, and so I will go ahead and turn this off in the interest of bandwidth. But so yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good afternoon. My name is Kevin O'Brien. I'm a planner with Tucson Electric Power, and I thank you for the opportunity to be heard in this matter of the TEP power pole relocation and modification along Silverbelt Road. In addition to myself, Jaime Reyes, TEP project manager, is in attendance today, along with Ian Milliken and other project stakeholders. Ian will be presenting information about cultural resources. The agenda for today's presentation includes background information, followed by a review of the project area and scope of work. This will provide you with a better understanding of why this project is needed and what is proposed. Members of the project team are also here to answer questions that you may have about the project overall. We will review special circumstances related to the project, such as cultural resources and floodplain interactions that prevent us from undergrounding the electric utility. We will close with a review of the project elements as related to the findings required for approval of the variance application. The background of this project, as I'll try to keep this brief, is that TEP is working in cooperation with the Silverbelt Road Transportation Improvement Project to relocate existing overhead power lines along Silverbelt Road. Mark provided a bit of this information in the introduction, but this transportation improvement project is a voter-approved effort that involves widening of Silverbelt Road from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. As such, TEP needs to move our facilities to make way for this road project. And a key point is that were it not for this road project, TEP would not be proposing this work. So the focus of today is on phase 2 of the project from Gore Road to El Camino del Cerro. And the overhead power line design that we will review today was selected as part of the extensive engineering and planning efforts that have been ongoing for nearly 10 years. Our relocation work is scheduled to begin during the first quarter of 2022. Silverbelt Road is a scenic route as illustrated on the major streets and routes map. As such, it is subject to ordinances that require undergrounding new utilities. Given the special circumstances surrounding the project area and other findings, we are requesting a variance from said ordinances. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at a few slides to get oriented on the planned work, and then we will revisit the crux of the matter pertaining to undergrounding. So the following maps show the alignment of the power line along Silverbelt Road. For reference, this inset map in white shows the length of the project from Camino del Cerro to Gore. The box, it represents the corresponding map extent, and you'll see it progresses from north to south. There are 6 map images, 3 on this slide, 3 on the next. So starting in the north, the existing power line is on the west side of the road, and it will remain on the west side of the road from Camino del Cerro to Sweetwater. At Sweetwater, the line will transition to the east side of the road, as seen on this blue line, and then continue along the east side. The line will transition back to the west side near Gore Road. So to recap, the existing line runs along the west side of Silverbelt Road for the entire length of the project. That is the current condition. The planned future condition is from Camino del Cerro to Sweetwater. It will remain on the west side. Then from Sweetwater to Gore, it will be relocated to the east side. And then we are moving the line from the west side to the east side to address unique topography, location, and surroundings on the hillier west side as the topography dictates. An important point is that the existing line on the west side of the road from Sweetwater to Gore will be removed, thus improving scenic views of the Tucson Mountains to the west. To help illustrate the project design, we have prepared several visual simulations. The image left is a photo of the current conditions. The image right is a rendering of planned future conditions, including the overlay of the planned transportation footprint. There are 4 visual simulations that we will review now. The first is this is located north of El Camino del Cerro, looking southwesterly on Silverbelt Road. So this white car and this black car heading south on Silverbelt, and this is Camino del Cerro at this intersection. The line is currently located on the west side of the road, and the plan is for that line to remain on the west side of the road, continuing south. This rendering number 2 shows the location where the line will transition from the west side of the road over to the east side of the road. And this is again looking south on Silverbelt. This is the intersection with Sweetwater Drive. This black car heading south on Silverbelt. The lines here transitioning to the east side. Continuing further south, this is located north of Avenida Albor, and this is looking sort of west southwesterly on Silverbelt. This white car in the foreground would be heading north on Silverbelt for reference. In this location, you'll see the planned future alignment is again along the east side of the road, and this entire line and poles on the west side would be removed, thus opening up the western extent of Silverbelt along that length. The 4th simulation is located towards the southern extent of the project. This is just north of Gore Road. So this is looking north on Silverbelt. The red car here is heading north on Silverbelt. And this is a location where the line will transition from the east side of the road back to the west side and reconnect with the existing infrastructure. The proposed structures for the project, they're weathering steel structures. This is kind of an organic rust color and also a material consistent with art installations along Tucson rights-of-way for reference. These weathering steel pole structures are used throughout Tucson. And an important point to consider is that the new poles will be more consistent and more cohesive in appearance. So There was question raised about the number of poles, and there's generally similar from Sweetwater to Goree in that relocation segment. There's going to be approximately 3 new poles, so 3 more poles than the current condition. And then from north of Sweetwater up to Camino del Cerro, there'll be a similar number of poles being replaced, just several being relocated to accommodate drainage easements and such. So in considering the height, that was another question that was raised. The new poles will, and I'll revert back to this slide, the new poles will have to be a bit taller, on average about 10 feet taller than the existing poles. And that's due in large part to the need to accommodate street lights that will be installed as part of the transportation project. TEP doesn't want to install poles taller than we need to. They're at the minimum height that can be in compliance with clearance requirements for the street lights. So that's been the integrated design on that front. So the existing conditions, there's a mix of poles of different material types. You have wood and steel poles. There's poles from different time periods, and you'll have varying configurations of equipment. Thus, one of the many benefits of the project overall is that the new poles will be more consistent and provide a more visually cohesive and ultimately a modernized Silverbelt Road corridor. Now, if this variance is denied, the existing lines will remain in the current state and the current alignment, as we cannot underground the line. And there's several primary constraints to undergrounding. And we understand that an underground design, wouldn't that be better for scenic objectives? Of course, moving the lines underground, it's undoubtedly the most scenic approach to the circumstances at hand. However, this variance was created, there were special circumstances that prevent us from undergrounding the line. This is also why the variance process was created per the UDC. Now, 2 of the special circumstances that constrain and prevent undergrounding along Silverbelt Road are the significant cultural resources, as well as floodplain interactions with the Santa Cruz River floodplain and tributary washes that run perpendicular to the road, as we will see. Now, briefly, for context, before we dive into the cultural resource topic, when it comes to undergrounding, these images illustrate 2 of the major activities required for undergrounding: the trench and the vault. As you can see, excavating a trench, as seen image left, is a significant task. And we would need to dig out a trench over 15 foot wide, and would also need to dig out vaults required for utility operations and safety. These are required every 800 feet, thus approximately 7 locations between Goree and Sweetwater alone, with 2 vaults at each location. So suffice to say, a significant amount of digging is required to install underground electrical utility infrastructure. There was also a question about the number of lines that are on the poles, and these poles currently accommodate 46 kV, that's 46,000 kilovolt, sub-transmission lines at the top. Those are the upper wires, as well as transmission underbuild and communications. The width of the trench is a function of those different utilities, and we were required per safety code to have separation between different circuits of different voltages, as well as separation from other utilities like communications. So in order to accommodate those utilities, a significant amount of excavation would be required. Thus, digging would potentially impact significant cultural resources along the alignment. And with that, I'll transition to Ian Milliken. He's the Pima County Cultural Resources and Historic Preservation Division Manager. He's working under an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Tucson to support this project. And Ian, are you available to start presenting?
I am here. Yes, Mr. Chair, would you like to administer the oath?
Oh, yes, I would. Yes. Could you raise your right hand? If you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth.
Yes, sir, I do.
And then could you, on your own, state your name again and identify your position and provide a business address?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board, my name is Ian Milliken. I currently serve as Pima County's Cultural Resource Manager. I work for Pima County's Office of Sustainability and Conservation. We are located at 201 North Stone Avenue on the 6th floor, Tucson, Arizona, 85701.
Okay, thank you. Why don't you proceed?
Well, I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Let me start by saying that I am not here on behalf of TEP. My mission here today is to provide you some adequate information regarding the cultural resources background of this corridor. I am here as a representative of one of 19 stakeholder groups, including 12 federally recognized tribal governments and 7 local, state, and federal agencies that have been involved with the Silverbelt widening project since it was approved by voters over a decade ago. As demonstrated by the number of attendees at today's meeting, the case before you is important to many stakeholders, but for varying reasons. Through this variance process, there have been a multitude of misunderstandings regarding the effects to cultural resources related to TEP's proposal to reconstruct and relocate their existing utility along the Silverbelt corridor. And it is important to kind of first understand and reiterate that this is not a TEP initiative. Although TEP is the applicant before you, the proposal to reconstruct, relocate, and remain aerial is a project requirement that not only meets roadway design needs, but it complies with a federal permitting process that governs the entire Silverbelt project. A critical part of this variance request is founded on the overall goal for the Silverbelt widening project, and that is to avoid and minimize harm to cultural resources. My goal today is to provide you a brief but comprehensive understanding of the significance of cultural resources in the corridor and why they represent a special circumstance that the board should consider in this variance request. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, I can.
Great. Okay.
Yes.
So in 2010, there was an archaeological survey that was commissioned by Pima County. And I will get into kind of how Pima County is involved in this project because this is a City of Tucson project. At the time in 2010, archaeologists surveyed the entire corridor between Gorey and Ina roads. Now, the Silverbelt project has been broken into at least 3 segments for construction purposes. First is Gorey to Grant, which was already completed by the City of Tucson. The current segment is Gorey to El Camino del Cerro, and then there will be a subsequent segment running from El Camino del Cerro to Ina. So the survey covered the entire area. What was found was over 39 archaeological sites. Now, these are discrete visual observations on the surface and are not necessarily indicative of what's going on subsurface, but they provide a pretty firm understanding that we are dealing with a nearly uninterrupted deposit of cultural resources. Those are the words of the archaeologists. With that, it was determined that the Silverbelt Archaeological District was formed, and it was the Arizona State Historic Preservation Office that determined it eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places. Now, one of the largest challenges associated with this project are the numerous wash crossings along Silverbelt Road. These ephemeral washes are optimal settings for evidence of ancestral settlements due to the importance of water for agricultural needs, as well as just for survival. When Silverbelt Road, the Grant to El Camino del Cerro, was designated as a scenic arterial street in the 1980s, there was little to no underlying data that could have suggested the sheer magnitude of cultural resources sensitivity of the area. In 2014, that first segment, Grant to Gorey, was constructed. Now, in that segment, there was no visual observations on the surface of intact archaeology. But based off of the findings north of there was a strong indication that there could be buried cultural resources, and that most likely those buried cultural resources were in very shallow context. We're talking from the modern ground surface down 5 feet that would have been impacted by roadway construction. So in this project, it was a City of Tucson project. It was not subject to a federal permit. We are working in what we call local framework of cultural resources compliance, subject to City of Tucson's rules and codes that apply to archaeology and transportation projects. Precautionary surface testing was recommended by the city historic preservation officer at the time. And sure enough, in that testing, buried cultural deposits were identified. These were 2 discrete but robust archaeological sites that would have been affected by the roadway transportation project. And so these were mitigated at that time based off of the roadway plans. So wherever roadway work was going to impact archaeology, that is where excavations were targeted, thereby preserving in place any archaeological deposits that were not going to be directly impacted by roadway construction. This segment that we are currently talking about from Gore to Camino del Cerro is actually subject to a 404 Clean Water Act permit. The future segment all the way up to Ina is going to be subject to the very same permit. This permit is issued by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and requires compliance with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. The first part of the compliance process is to work and identify with stakeholder groups and establish what is called a programmatic agreement. It's an agreement that outlines the process for how resources will be considered as for project effects, and identify the stakeholders. And then we work towards creating what is a historic properties treatment plan, how these resources will be treated in relation to the project. To give you an idea of the diversity of groups that we were talking about, we're dealing with 12 federally recognized Indian tribes, 7 local, state, and federal agencies. The U.S. Army Corps is the lead federal agency on this project, and the tribes are consulting parties that have strict positions when it comes to how they engage with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Now, I mentioned that there was some complexity with how Pima County got involved in this. Pima County and the City of Tucson, Pima County was actually approached by the City of Tucson to establish an intergovernmental agreement where Pima County would enact a cultural resources consultant to actually fulfill work of the historic properties treatment plan. They would be the ones carrying out the work. Pima County would oversee this work. Pima County would coordinate with the U.S. Army Corps and the State Historic Preservation Office in ensuring that all the communications and plans that were drawn up actually are executed to their full extent. So the historic properties treatment plan, as I discussed, was written in such a way and was agreed upon by all stakeholder groups that it concluded in the following. There was a project consensus that the approach to this project would take a 3-tiered approach. The first, avoid impacts to cultural resources. The second, minimize. And the third and last, and only when necessary, is mitigate. It applies to all aspects of the project, not just roadway construction. It applies to landscaping. It applies to water fountains if those are proposed. It applies to utilities. It applies to any and all aspects of this project that relate to the Silverbelt widening. Now, how do we do this? How do we execute this? So potential effects to cultural resources are considered early on in design. We review the design plans as they move through the process, and we identify areas in which there are going to be ground disturbing activities. You can see I put them here. There are 3 types of ground disturbing activities identified in the roadway plans. There's cut from kind of a 150 to from a modern day ground surface down to 1.5 feet. And then there's a deeper cuts in selected areas that range all the way down to 15.86 feet below modern ground surface. There are drainage easement impacts, and utilities are included in some of those. But at this time, we also identified that the majority of the project resulted in the import, not the export of soils. So there's a lot of fill activities involved with this project because of the raising of the road. This roadway is actually going to have its entire profile not only widened, but raised up in the air in order to mitigate some flooding issues. So we have what's then defined as a federal area of potential effects. This is a boundary, a firm boundary that is defined in the Historic Properties Treatment Plan and the programmatic agreement that governs this project, which means all work must occur within this boundary. So there was questions with the design review board about why TEP's line couldn't go on the WAPA lines, or why couldn't it go outside of the Silverbelt corridor? Well, because of the fact that they need to relocate in order to accommodate the project, they are bound to relocate within the designated area of potential effects, which is depicted here. So to give you a little outline of how the segment is going in terms of the cultural resources, there was a pre-construction phase. That pre-construction phase is depicted in pink here. It's basically an investigation of cultural resource impacts outside of the current roadway prism. That was completed in May of this year. And then the second stage is where we are right now, the utility relocation stage. That is where we analyze each of the utilities plans and we monitor and mitigate all utility pole replacements and ground disturbance. Then we move on to the construction phase, in which we monitor earthwork, ensure protection and in-place preservation, and avoid resources, again, because of these filling activities. So to give you an idea of, Mr. Dawson had mentioned the Animal Care Center. This is a picture of what the Animal Care Center looks like in 2021. The blue here represents the Silverbelt area of potential effects. So the road will be widened right here next to the Animal Care Center, located just north of Sweetwater. In 2021, this is what it looked like. In 2016, this is what it looked like. Well, at this time, Pima County knew that this was a very significant archaeological site that had been identified as a priority cultural resource in the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan. We worked with facilities management because we knew that there was a need to expand the Animal Care Center. And we looked at every opportunity to move the Animal Care Center to expand in a way that would minimize its impact on this historic property. Well, after much deliberation, it was determined that it was not possible to avoid. But there was this misconception that is often, unfortunately, too common, is that this looks fairly disturbed. It looks like it has had quite a bit of disturbance, and that disturbance would not allow for any intact cultural resources to be present on this location. This is the result. It is pretty extensive. There were over 29 residential features to one period. There were 30 residential features of another period. There were numerous ancestral features, ancillary features, as well as human burials. So the idea of previously disturbed kind of goes out the door. But notice that the trenches here, as you go towards the floodplain, decrease in the quantity of identifiable historic resources. The majority of activity was occurring on this landform, closer to the roadway, right where it raises up on the hill. There's reasons for that in terms of how people were living and where they wanted to live in this geographical location. So keep going. We then proceeded to take that information from that previous excavation and apply it across the landscape. So we have the survey data, we have previous investigations in small areas. Every indication is that you have significant cultural resources spanning the entire length of this project. The first step that we did was to do a comprehensive archaeological testing where we stratigraphically or systematically, go in and put trenches all throughout the corridor. And these are spaced in a way to give us an understanding of not only the horizontal distribution, but the vertical distribution of cultural features throughout this area. We then knew that we were targeting any additional mitigation based on the results of that testing in areas that were going to be disturbed, and avoid testing and any mitigation in areas that were going to be filled. So with that, we find that we have about, of the entire project area, 38.65 acres of it is going to be fill activities, no potential for disturbance. We have smaller acreages for areas that are going to experience disturbance. And so we target those areas of the cuts and the drainage easements for mitigation. We do not do any mitigation in areas that are not going to have ground disturbance. Now notice the utility disturbance is estimated at less than 1 acre, with the understanding that all utilities will be aerial, that can be aerial. So there are existing utilities within this corridor underneath the road. Those utilities are not moving. There is an existing sewer line. It's not moving. It stays put. There's an existing water line. It's not moving. It stays put. Those utilities were likely installed at a time prior to any cultural resources compliance, yet their impacts have already been done, and we are not resizing, widening, shifting any of those existing buried utilities. To give you an example of what occurred during pre-construction, what resulted from the pre-construction, I'm going to give you two archaeological site contexts that were investigated against specific impacts. The first is one, and I'm not showing any geographic locations in order to provide some sensitivity to the resource, but in this one area that was investigated, 37 residential structures were identified, 200 plus architectural features, 14 ancestral burials, 1 documented funerary area, and agricultural features, including the first ever documented prehistoric reservoir in the Tucson Basin. There are represents over 2,000 years of history documented in one site context, which represents a very small portion of the entire roadway project area. But again, it was targeted because of the fact that there were going to be direct impacts from roadway construction. The second is a little bit more severe. It was a very contentious area because what happened was when we tested it, we immediately found that not only were deposits very shallow, but that we had a significant assemblage of ancestral remains. At that point, we stopped work and we regrouped with the City of Tucson design engineers because this is a drainage way. This wash right here is a significant wash that requires improvement. However, we wanted to see whether there was any opportunity to shift and alter the plans in order to minimize our impact in this area. Unfortunately, because of how significant a wash is, subject to a 404 permit, this wash was very attractive to the ancestors who lived on both sides of here. And regardless of any modifications that were to be made, the modifications required impacts for flood control purposes, as well as for the roadway design. So after much consultation, the project moved forward with the understanding that we would take this information and better plan for future segments. So in this segment, we tested after design. We didn't know what was buried here. On the next segment from El Camino del Cerro to Aina, we will actually go in and test the area prior to design in order to better inform the design process. In this site, however, we're dealing with over 3,000 years of documented history in one site. We have 93 residential structures, over 180 other architectural features, and a significant composition of ancestral remains that unfortunately were impacted as a result of this project. Road projects in Tucson very rarely afford opportunities for in-place preservation due to the overwhelming necessity of connecting points A to B in a straight line. But with road projects in floodplain areas, there is opportunity that we have capitalized on in protecting deeply buried cultural deposits underneath roadways, as we have more modern flood deposits that have kind of covered and protected those ancestral remains. But with a road widening project where we are restricted by the original footprint of the road. But in the case of Silverbelt, we encountered a significant challenge in the cultural landscape in which the road was originally built. This project, however, is a unique advantage in terms of its raised design that other widening projects typically do not provide. Instead of widening from existing grade, the vast majority of the road is being built and raised, requiring the import, not the export of soils. The real impacts to cultural resources on this project result from the numerous ephemeral washes that cross the existing road, transporting water from the mountains to the river. Due to the development of the surrounding residential areas, these washes are in desperate need of flood control improvements independent of the road project. But similar to our modern emphasis on water in this arid desert climate, the region's ancestors settled along these washes for millennia, and there is no surprise that we are encountering profound evidence of their lifeways in this corridor. From a total project standpoint, however, the scale of impacts is considerably less than most roadway projects, and we were afforded an outstanding opportunity to preserve them in place. So I'm going to bring you back to this table and understand that this is what we're looking against if the variance is denied. We are looking at an additional 500% increase in utility disturbance from what was originally planned, and a 30% increase in overall project disturbance. Here are some points to consider in terms of a denial. And here are some points to consider an approval. I acknowledge that as the Board of Adjustments, your mandate is to protect the scenic values of the Silverbelt corridor. But in this case, however, your mandate conflicts with conditions set forth in a federal permit, and also with the deep legacy of historic preservation and conservation that the county and the city have been jointly committed to for over 30 years. The variance request before you is supported by 12 federally recognized tribal governments, Pima County, and 6 other agency stakeholders, not because of aesthetics or economics, but because we are all vested in the belief that place matters and the material history of places matter. In the hierarchy of values we all must consider, we must prioritize the sanctity of our region's ancestral footprint when there is an option to do so. Of course, there are modern day needs that do not allow for this to happen, but the case before you is not one of them. Approving this variance will affirm a continued commitment to stewardship that is of such vital importance for current residents and visitors, and which we hope to bestow to future generations. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much. That took a lot of time, but you provided us with a lot of information. I don't have any questions for you. I will ask the other board members if they have any for you. I think your message is very clear, though, and therefore I don't know that we're going to need to have any further back and forth. But I think we may still, if we don't now, have a question when the petitioner wraps things up, if that becomes necessary at that point. But let me ask the board members, do any of you have a question for Mr. Milliken? We're hearing none.
No question.
Is that Ms. Kubish?
No questions.
Oh, okay.
Mr.
Okay,
Chairman.
very good. Well, I'm going to just assume there are no questions for you at this time. I want to thank you. You did a very complete and very professional job in conveying the information that you have. And hopefully you don't leave. We may come back to you, but I want to go back to the petitioner and ask if there's anything further he has to offer at this time. And keep in mind the amount of time we're taking, and we do have a lot of other people that want to speak today.
Yes, there are several additional slides that I would like to conclude the presentation. Just to confirm, are you able to see my screen with the floodplain?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Okay. I will try to get through these relatively quickly in the interest of time. But I do have some final points to make here. As you've heard, there are a number of floodplain areas associated with the project. The power line alignment seen in red, overlaid on the City of Tucson floodplain map, seen image right, is based on FEMA floodplain mapping. Many of these tributary washes currently flow over the top of Silverbelt Road. And as part of the transportation improvement project, the roadway is designed with culverted crossings that allow flow to go under the road, which is a great improvement for hydrology and safety and the use of Silverbelt Road. However, there are a number of challenges for undergrounding an electric utility in this context. This table shows in more quantitative terms the number of crossings, and while there's a lot of detailed engineering and design information here, I want to just highlight for you several of the larger crossings highlighted in yellow in the upper right. You will see that the channel widths of these crossings are quite large, with several in excess of 100 feet. So routing electric utilities under such crossings poses challenges that limit the feasibility of doing so. And while filter is being imported, as Ian mentioned, the depth is not sufficient to support electrical trench specifications in terms of depth and with. There are many various technical matters and nuances that limit the feasibility of undergrounding electric utilities on this project. There are constraints pertaining to vertical and horizontal separation of the utilities from other utilities. There are conflicts with not only the floodplain crossings, but also the drainage areas and easements for the project. There are constraints associated with fill depths on top of culverts versus trench depths going under culverts, as well as associated constructability and sequencing limitations, and long-term issues that also pertain to maintenance of an underground utility, including risks for prolonged power outages if an underground utility was constructed. Now, we could spend days reviewing the engineering details, the electrical safety codes, the construction practices, and the like. But as you mentioned, in the interest of time, there's really one underlying fact that governs, and that is that even if we could find an engineering solution that worked to underground the project, we could not find a solution that avoided the impacts to the unique and valuable cultural resources associated with the project area. These cultural resources no doubt pose special circumstances as clearly presented by Ian. So the planned work, it will improve the safety, functionality, and aesthetics of Silverbelt Road. TUP's relocation is not self-imposed, it's not a privilege. We are being asked to relocate it, and we're happy to do so in partnership with the stakeholders. However, we are not asking to relocate. And again, were it not for this project, we wouldn't be here before you today. And if the variance is denied, we'll have to stay overhead in our existing alignment, which is overhead. Project stakeholders have worked throughout this project collaboratively to avoid and minimize impacts to cultural resources and to develop an integrated project plan to address the unique topography, location, and surroundings of Silverbelt Road. TP is honored to be part of this project where electric utility infrastructure is integrated with transportation design for a more cohesive, consistent, and ultimately a more modernized Silverbelt Road corridor. Scenic ordinances were enacted without full knowledge of cultural resources. A lot has been learned since the ordinance was adopted in the early 80s, as Ian inferred, and is likely not the intent of those that drafted the legislation to force new undergrounding where doing so impacts ancestral properties and cultural resources. So a brief recap as it relates to the findings required for approval of the variance application is that the cultural resources and other constraints absolutely apply to this case. There are special circumstances. These circumstances were not self-imposed. TEP is working at the request of the City of Tucson with project stakeholders and working in accord with permits and site conditions. This does not constitute a grant of special privilege. TP is required to relocate. We're not asking for any privileges, but rather collaborating with a voter-approved regional improvement project. The special circumstances, including size, shape, topography, location, and surroundings, absolutely apply in this case. So in addition to the cultural resources and floodplain conditions, topography on the western side of Silverbelt, for example, influenced roadway and utilities design and informed that relocation to the east side so as to avoid impacts to that topography and western location. The variance cannot be detrimental to public welfare or injurious to other property or improvements. There are existing utility lines that are currently located along Silverbelt Road, and these are not injurious. We're not increasing voltages. Everything will remain in terms of the current voltage, so there's no increase or potential for increased injury. And we can't impair the supply of light or air, or increase congestion or diminish property values. And this project, to the contrary, will function to decrease congestion, improve safety along Silverbelt Road. And through the research that we've done, there's no statistically significant impairment to property values. And certainly in alignment with the UDC, there's no substantial diminishment or impairment to those values. And the final is that the design that we're proposing is the least modification possible of the UDC provision, which in fact it is. The existing overhead utilities will remain overhead, allowing for the least possible modification. And this has been developed in concert with project stakeholders to ensure that this is in fact the case. So with that, I will conclude. I appreciate your time and attention to this project, and we'll open it up for questions, and thank you.
Okay. I have one question, at least that I have in my mind at this point, and that is for clarification on the scenario where, well, first of all, let me put it this way. Are all of the existing power poles within the subject segment within the proposed roadway prism, so that are all of them impacted, and would all of them have to be moved due to the proposed roadway construction?
So we'll break that down into two segments of the road. The first from Camino del Cerro to Sweetwater. In that segment, the alignment again will stay on the west side of the road, and just individual poles will be relocated where they were in conflict with a drainage easement, for example. From Sweetwater to Goree, that entire segment will be relocated. So all of those poles, new poles will be installed on the east side. All of the existing poles will be removed from the west side.
Well, maybe I didn't put the question clearly enough. There is let's say a planned roadway prism, which includes the pavement, any sidewalks or multi-path, what have you. That prism area, does it encompass the location of all of the existing poles? Hello?
Yeah, so the prism, the planned prism, as well as the associated drainage structures and features, it encompasses all of the poles from Sweetwater to the south, and encompasses some of the poles between that first segment. And the ones that aren't encompassed or in conflict with the prism will not be moved in that northern segment.
Oh, so some of these poles in this segment will remain as where they are because they're not within the planned roadway prism.
Right, yeah, or within the footprint of the drainage easements, for example.
No, that's consistent with what I'm getting at. Okay, that's interesting. So you are forced to move those poles from the nearly all of the poles need to be moved either on the surface out to a point outside of the planned roadway prism or underground, but they can't remain where they are.
That's correct. That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And we understand the argument for not installing an underground, which is the argument of the impact on the archaeological resources. So that's all I think I've got. I want to turn to the board members and ask, do any of you have a question for the petitioner at this point? Well, hearing none, I will ask you to step back for a little bit. I want to thank you. You provided a lot of good information, and I want to move forward to the others that are present who wish to speak. And the normal sequence is to ask if there's anybody who wishes to speak in favor. And so let me do that first, and let me make clear, are there any people in the virtual audience that are here to speak in favor of the variance request?
Yes, Tohono O'odham Nation.
Oh, okay.
Yes, the Hopi tribe as well.
Have you got a video?
Yes, Pasqua Yaqui tribe.
Yeah, can you turn your video on?
I'm on telephone. This is Mr. Steer from the Tohono O'odham Nation. I'm on the phone. I don't have video.
Okay. Well, why don't you, could you raise your right hand and do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, could you repeat your name and your position and your business address?
My name is Peter Steer. I am the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Tohono O'odham Nation. My mailing address is Post Office Box 837, Sells, Arizona 85634.
Okay, very good. Why don't you proceed with the comments you want to make?
Yeah, the nation had sent a letter in on this, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the Tohono O'odham Nation Tribal Historic Preservation Office supports the efforts of Pima County to assist the Tucson Electric Power Company in their efforts in requesting a variance that will allow a new overhead line to be constructed, thus avoiding impacting on cultural resource sites that likely include hundreds of ancestral human burials significant to the Tohono Nation. The Tohono O'odham Nation Historic Preservation Office appreciates the efforts of the Pima County Office of Sustainability and Conservation in consulting with the Tohono O'odham Nation regarding the Silverbelt Road widening project and its potential impacts on many cultural sites located in or near the right-of-way. The Tohono O'odham Nation claimed cultural affiliation to the archaic and Holcomb prehistoric cultural groups in southern Arizona. The Tohono O'odham Nation's Tribal Historic Preservation Office stresses the need to identify and, whenever possible, to avoid impacting on cultural resource sites. These prehistoric cultural sites are regarded as significant traditional cultural places that should be avoided. Previous cultural resource survey work, as outlined by Mr. Milliken along Silverbelt Road, has revealed the presence of many prehistoric cultural sites. Construction work on the Silverbelt Road project has already resulted in the disturbance of many Holcomb ancestral burials. The Tribal Historic Preservation Office supports Pima County's position that the requirement of an underground Tucson electric power line is unnecessary. The new electric line should be installed as an overhead line that will minimize disturbance to the cultural sites present in the project area. The Tohono O'odham Nation Tribal Historic Preservation Office strongly believes that the Board of Adjustment should focus on preserving and protecting the culturally significant sites along Silverbelt Road. If this variance is denied, there will be a huge increase in potential ground disturbance that could very likely result in the disturbance of many more ancestral burials and features. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of the board members, are there any questions for the gentleman just spoke? Okay, let me move forward. Was there somebody else that that spoke up before and that wished to speak now that's in favor of the request? And I acknowledge, I see a hand up from a Barbara Whitaker. Is that somebody that is in favor of the request?
No.
Okay, well, we'll get to you when we get to the other side. But I'm still asking, is there anybody else that wishes to speak in favor? So I don't hear any, so let me.
The Hopi tribe wishes to.
Excuse me. Could you speak up?
Yes, my name is Stuart Oyayam Iwa, and I represent the Hopi tribe, and I am in support of the variance.
Okay, have you got video?
I have my camera on. I don't see myself. I don't know if that's not working, but I do see you.
Okay, well, why don't I swear you in, and if you could raise your right hand, do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, would you repeat your name and position and business address?
My name is Stuart Bruce Oyayam Tiwa. I serve as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Hopi tribe, and my address is P.O. Box 123, Kikotsmovi, Arizona. That's KYKOTSMOVI, Arizona, 86039.
Okay, very good. If you had any comments to make, go ahead.
Yeah, I wish to thank the board for giving me this opportunity to speak in behalf of the Hopi tribe. I want to make my comments short. I know a lot of people are waiting to comment on the opposition. But if you will, imagine receiving email notifications on a daily basis that one of your ancestors have been uncovered for a proposed project. And this occurrence is not only stressful, it is also hurtful in the name of assessing or a ceremonial rite where a person is to be have its final resting place. And unfortunately, you know, the ancestors who dwell in these areas far existed the time of the city of Tucson and Pima County. So we understand that by going or constructing your power lines overhead will cause the least number of disturbance to this given area, which is, as mentioned, is a historic site based on the proximity to waterways, including the Rialto River. We oppose this project going underground because this project going underground will cause significant disturbances, and as presented in the Pima County presentation today, in the very small confined area where literally hundreds of archaeological and human remains have been unearthed. And imagine, you know, if this project is to go forward underground, the same thing happening throughout the corridor. And we are simply trying to prevent that from happening by supporting TEP's proposal to put the electric lines overhead to minimize those impacts to our ancestors who dwelt in this area prior to Pima County and Tucson, City of Tucson being in existence. So, you know, out of respect for our loved ones that have deceased and have chosen those final resting places, we want to support that effort. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak in favor of the request?
I do.
Yes, I would like to speak.
I have one lady who has said, I do. Could you raise your right hand, and do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And could you identify yourself, your name and your address?
My name is Laura Fairbanks. My address is 3584 North Avenida Albor, Tucson, Arizona, 85745. And I've actually changed my mind. As much as I don't want more overhead lines near my neighborhood, I must respect the wishes of the Native Americans who were on this land way before we were. We've taken enough from them. And if they are in favor of the overhead lines, then I will be in favor of them as well.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate your openness and ability to change your mind. That's a great example. Thank you. I don't think we have any questions. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay. Is there anybody else in favor?
Yes, this is Carl Herrig. I'm in favor.
Carl, do you have a video?
I do.
Yeah, there you go. Would you raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
I swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, yes.
And could you state your name and address?
Yes, my name is Carl Herrig. I'm the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Pascua Yaqui tribe. My address is 7777 South Camino Huivisim, Building C, Tucson, Arizona, 85757.
Okay.
I can't speak any more eloquently than the previous speakers have spoken, but I do want to add my voice and in representation of the Pascua Yaqui tribe, that we are in favor of TEP's request for the variance in order to keep from disturbing the ancestral sites that are located in great abundance along Silverbelt Road. If this variance is not is not awarded, as the previous speakers have said, scores and probably even hundreds of ancestors will be disturbed. When an ancestral burial is disturbed, it causes spiritual, physical, emotional, and cultural harm to those ancestors and to the descendant communities. As a historic preservation professional, I am not a big fan of overhead power lines. I have actually directed projects to remove overhead power lines. This is one of those situations where the far lesser of two evils is to live with the overhead power lines and not disturb the ancestral sites that are there, the ancestors of the Hopi, of the O'odham, of the Yaqui people.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yeah, appreciate it. Okay, and if that completes your presentation, I want to ask if there's anybody else present who is in favor.
Yes, sir. I have a comment, please.
And
I do have a video.
Could you turn your video on?
Yes, there it is. There I am.
Okay. Could you raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And would you state your name and address?
Yes, my name is Teresita Majewski. My address is 4050 West Erie Drive, Tucson 85741. And I'm speaking in my role as chair of the Tucson Pima County Historical Commission. And I just wanted to note that at our November 10th meeting, the full commission voted unanimously to support the variance, primarily because of the extensive damage that would occur to the ancestral sites and remains that are along that corridor. It's an extremely rich corridor. And also for a concern along with Pima County for increasing project costs unnecessarily and disturbance to that area. And I thank you for this time.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there anybody else that is in favor?
Hello, yes, this is Homero Cersosimo. I am also in favor.
Could you turn your video on?
Yes. Hello.
Okay, and would you raise your right hand, and do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And could you repeat your name and your and provide us with your address?
Yes, my name is Homero Cersosimo. I live in 3267 North Dells Crossing Drive, so I'm around the corner from where the project is going to be. And I initially rejected the variant, but after acquiring all this new information, I am in favor of the project as is.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I appreciate the information.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, let me move on and see if there's anybody else present that is in favor.
Yes.
And could you turn your video on? And yeah, would you do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
State your name and address, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Abriza Zakir. I reside at 2425 South Forest Avenue. I am in Ward 1. I am the chair of my neighborhood association. This is, I've done a lot of research into this, and I reviewed the research from Desert Archaeology along with some other projects going along Silverbelt. And this is just a shout out to, I want to say so with respect to the tribal members that have spoken. As soon as I read a lot of this archaeology, I was concerned about the burial sites. I'm concerned about one specific site that I believe Stuart K visited, and that was site 93 that was located to that new development called Silverbelt Crossings. I believe that was the site where they noted a lot of burial in each side of the wash there. And it should be noted that Planning and Development Services, PDSD, at the City of Tucson did not require this development to do any type of archaeological surveys before they started piling dirt on it and diverting the wash going through there. I do hope it didn't harm or damage any of your ancestors or your heritage through there. And I urge caution on not taking things at face value and saying what they're going to do, and that all eyes should be on this project at all time to protect the archaeological and historic plans along there. Also, TEP, I'm wondering why you're jumping back and forth across the roadway. It start on the west side, stay on the west side. Those lines jump over right next to Silverbelt crossing areas, which is already being damaged already. And it's providing lines right in front of that development, brand new development, which sandwiches them between the new lines that'll be there, along with the WAPA lines and higher electronic lines that go back there on the east side of that project. I'm not a fan of overhead electric lines, and a lot of people aren't, but I am would prefer that over damaging the environmental areas through there. Also, it's requested that some of the streams going through there, that the roads be raised enough to allow wildlife corridors going through there. Otherwise, you're going to have a high-speed traffic going down there, killing deer and other animals headed down to the Rialto or over to the lakes in Columbus Park or over to the golf course. And so you're going to create a lot of hazards for our native wildlife. Also, we don't need water fountains along the roadway. Do need appropriate sidewalks. So anyway, I want to thank you and for having this, and thank the board members for sticking it out. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me ask, is there anybody else in favor that wishes to speak?
Yes.
Okay, would you turn your video on?
I'm actually on the telephone.
Oh, okay. Well, if you see me, I'm raising my right hand. If you would do the same, and do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Could you state your name and address?
Sure. My name is Hilda Souza War Soldier. My address is 4059 West Still Canyon Pass, Tucson, Arizona, 85745.
Okay.
I was initially in favor. I'm sorry. Initially I opposed the variance, and after listening to the discussion today, I have changed my position and now support it. And I just wanted to. That's all I wanted to say, is that I fully support this variance.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Okay. How about anybody else? Is there anybody else in favor? Hearing none, I want to turn to those that oppose the request. And I did ask staff previously, you may have heard, whether there was somebody that might kind of coordinate this. I'm not sure of the numbers. Maybe this other person does, and I am looking for the name. I think it was Denise Baldwin. Is Miss Baldwin present?
I am here. Yes.
Okay, good, good. I'm not sure what coordinating the presentation with others really means, but if there's anything you can do to kind of, put it together with others, that would be helpful. But why don't I first start by having you raise your right hand, and do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, and then please repeat your name and your address, and are you a resident nearby, or are you representing the residents in some, lawyer kind of role or not?
My name is Denise Baldwin. My address is 1101 North Calle Gardenias, Tucson, Arizona, 85745. I'm the Vice President of Tucson Mountains Association, and we represent the interests of residents throughout the entire Tucson Mountains. And I would caution that although it's not a coordinated effort, because we have, we do coordinate and represent the interests of our residents, but we are a unique, we have residents that have their own voices. So the people that are here deserve to have their voices heard. But what I can do is I can speak for the specific issues that I have, and then we are also partnered with. We have joined with Howard and Annette Baldwin as to the legal matters. So we have two issues that are to be discussed. So what I will speak of today is a little bit of rebuttal regarding what I've heard, and I would like to remind the board that this is a fill project. First of all, a fill project, and that this is there's going to be up to 10 feet of fill brought in to this project. And what that means is pretty significant and a unique type of construction project. And I've been to the design review board meetings, and by their own account that they've had record meetings, and that this is and discussions about what this project meant, and that they didn't feel comfortable with what TEP has done in terms of exploring the options. And that is important. The reason why the discussions went on and on with the design review board was that they didn't feel that TEP explored all the options as it pertained to this project, and that they could have not disturbed the surface of the ground, and that they could have explored how to be part of the fill. They could have done more in this project. So there, and in the end, they had to trust TEP going forward. So I need to add that. It's difficult when you're dealing with a corporation that has the information, and then they say, well, gosh, we want to, but we just can't. And so you and that they have the plans and they're submitting the plans. But the fact is, we have an ordinance, we have a scenic route ordinance that was designed to do one thing, and that is look out for what we are trying to protect in our community. And what we have through TEP is the industrialization of our city, and now it's expanding into our scenic routes. And we're looking at 36-inch diameter width poles. These are not tiny poles, these little 18-inch wood poles. These are 36-inch monolithic poles that are going to go up and now be part of our scenic route. So we're not talking tiny. This is not something that's natural. And so with that, I would like to proceed with what I am here to discuss. As you mentioned, and as part of the introduction, I'm I'm a resident of the west side of Tucson. I am the vice president of Tucson Mountains Association. We were established in 1934. And TMA is joined with Howard and Annette Baldwin, who will present our legal arguments, including the city's material failure in phase 1 of allowing TEP to install above ground poles without regard to the Scenic Route Ordinance. Both parties are complicit, and this is of legal concern to our community. The question is whether we are here, the question is whether we are here for TEP or the people of our community who will be harmed as a result of potentially undermining the Scenic Route Ordinance. I requested the board to tour Silverbelt Road and gauge the proximity of a proposed Silverbelt distribution line to the 2 transmission lines and what that means to our communities. All poles will be upgraded. And that question was brought up that they will, if they're not moved, they will be upgraded to the 36-inch diameter poles. As Silverbelt is a fill project of up to 10 feet. The DRB discussed usual circumstances require innovative solutions. DRB was troubled that TEP didn't explore options, only made excuses, and place matters. It is utterly disrespectful to not expand the fill area to accommodate the needs of the community and be respectful of our history. We can cooperate, and we should. TEP has not. TEP didn't involve the communities that would be harmed by above ground lines or provide options. The plan was presented in a Q&A format to the affected residents. It is unfair to force residents to accept these risks. Loss of property value, safety, and undermining of our scenic route. Regarding property value reduction, please see the Silverbelt crossings pictures that I provided in my attachments on pages 3, 6, and 7. TEP acknowledges property values will be 10% lower by being located next to power lines. Research indicates that land 1,000 feet from a power line sells 18% less. Adjacent land sells 45% less. Let that sink in when we're talking about what the impact is in this area. In a November 4th, 2020 City Council study session, Councilman Kozacek presented a Wall Street Journal study that supported the 10% devaluation of TEP for homes. Councilman Kozacek also reported a 2018 line siting committee hearing where Commissioner Woodall questioned TEP, asking whether it was conceivable that property owners would seek damages regarding loss of value, and TEP said absolutely yes. And so this is by their own recognition. This is economics 101. Buyers prefer the natural environment and pay less to be next to industrial power lines. Regarding safety, climate change brings more complex issues with extreme weather. Above ground power lines spark and cause fires. At risk are property damage, lives, and our desert. Please see the photo on page 1 regarding the sparks that can develop and then become part of the unimaginable fires. In 2019, pole auto accidents caused 1,363 fatalities, 100,800 crashes, of which 40% were with injury, 7% were incapacitating. Power lines snap, go down, and cause long outages. That costs the U.S. economy $33 billion in the average year. And undergrounding could prevent the property and safety issues. Simply. Vice Mayor Cunningham stated at the same study session on November 4th, 2020, the Metro Phoenix area has no problem undergrounding. Tucson is in your name. It is about time that you do what's right for Tucson. And I'll leave you with this, that this is about enforcing the scenic route ordinance. As Council Member Kozacek asks, are we going to allow utilities decide the aesthetic for our city, or are we going to defend our visual environment? And cooperation is definitely within our future. We can work together to protect our history, and we can work together to protect the residents of the area and our habitat, so that we can enjoy the natural beauty of our communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I could ask who would like to speak in opposition next, or I can turn to Mr. Baldwin, who was just referenced. And so I think maybe it would be smart to do that. And so we'll do that. And if I can ask Ms. Baldwin this one question, since you're still on my screen. I take it you're at home on your own. You're not with others that are part of this Zoom meeting that would be speaking in opposition, are you?
Steve Dolan is present, and he will be speaking. Steve, he's speaking as to other aspects, technical aspects. So he would also be here. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good. We'll come back to that. Let me go to Mr. Baldwin. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is Mr. Baldwin present?
Yes, I am.
And could you turn your video on?
I'm trying to. For some reason, it doesn't seem to want to turn on.
You know, if you would like a little time to figure that out, I could go to somebody else and come back to you.
Well, that's all right. Unfortunately, it won't turn on for some reason, and I can present, my matter vocally if you don't mind.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I would normally ask you to raise your right hand, but you're an attorney and you're speaking in the role of attorney at this point?
Well, I'm representing myself and my wife, and I'm happy to raise my
okay, then why don't you do that? Do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, and would you repeat your name and give us your address?
Certainly. My name is Howard Baldwin. I'm an attorney. My law office is at 22 East University Boulevard in Tucson.
Okay, thank you. Why don't you proceed?
Yes. Just a little background. I have been in the past a legal advisor to several of the Pima County Boards of Adjustment. I've represented boards of adjustment in court. I've also appeared before them representing Homeowners Association. I've represented boards of adjustment as high as the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So I'm well versed in Board of Adjustment law, and I have a good background in this particular area. In this particular case, I've submitted 2 memos to the board, and I hope that the chairperson and the members have had a chance to look at those, because I'm hoping that they will be helpful for you from a legal standpoint. We've also provided with the letter, we provided you with 19 questions. If you would ask yourselves those questions and get the answers to them in this process, that it will be very obvious to you that you really can't grant a board of adjustment, you can't grant a variance in this particular case. TEP is really trying to pull a fast one here. And I tell you, they've succeeded with some of these people. Some of the people that were opposed to the granting of the variance have come around because they started pulling at their heartstrings, and that's what TEP is trying to do. They're trying to make this into a case of, well, if you're for undergrounding, you're against the ancestors that came before. You're against the natives who populated this area for the thousands of years ago. And it's an easy thing to do, because if you take and look at the Santa Cruz River Valley, that's where all of our predecessor populations came from. That's where they lived. That's where they farmed. That's where they were buried. But unfortunately, civilization needs to progress. People need to have houses. They need to have highways. They need to have the things that support those. And so over the years, we've developed laws. Arizona developed Antiquities Law back in 1927. We have laws that were developed by the US government that were talked about by Mr. Milliken in his presentation. And we found ways that we have to address these issues, because we all have a profound respect, and we want that respect to be shown, and a reverence for the people that came before us. But that's not the issue here. TEP doesn't care about artifacts. They aren't worried about flooding. TEP is worried about cost. They're worried about the fact that, as they say often, and you can go to any website or you can ask any of their people, it costs 10 to 13.5 times more to underground electrical utilities. That's the problem here. And guess what? If they have to follow the protocols for archaeology, then that's going to cost more too, because it's going to slow their project down. It's going to cost them a lot more money. So what they're worried about here is money. Ask TEP how many miles of transmission line it has underground now. Ask that question of them. Remember to do that. They have a policy, a written policy, that they will not underground transmission or sub-transmission lines. And they won't underground distribution lines unless you pay for it. So let's not kid ourselves about what's going on here. There are 4 reasons why this board should not and cannot grant a variance. The first reason is the unstated profit, the loss that they would experience if they have to pay to underground this. That's the real problem here. And they're trying to create diversions. 2 of the reasons that I'm going to give you that you can't grant a variance in this case are based on a City of Tucson case. It's the case that we cited in our memo to you. It's Haynes versus the City of Tucson. It's a 1989 case. You can ask the city attorney about this. And it involved your predecessor Board of Adjustment back in 1989. I don't imagine there's any members still on the board that were there then in 1989, but the Hayneses wanted to build a restaurant on one of the corners of Euclid and University Boulevard. And they wanted to build a big restaurant. And the problem with their building a big restaurant that they had designed is that they didn't leave enough parking space. So they went to the Board of Adjustment and they said, Board of Adjustment, it's not profitable for us to have a restaurant that's smaller that will accommodate the number of parking spaces we need. Give us a variance. And they said also, there's another reason that we need a variance, because most of the people that come to our restaurant, they're on foot. So we don't really need the parking spaces. Well, it went to court. The board granted the variance, and the neighbors took them to court. And the lower court agreed with the Hayneses, and then it went on appeal. And our Court of Appeals here in Tucson took the case, and the Court of Appeals says, no, you had no grounds to grant that variance. And the reasons you didn't have any grounds is that their loss of profit is a chimerical thing. It's something that they've made up. Because anybody could come to you and say, well, we're going to lose profits, or we're not going to make enough money, or it's going to cost too much. And then you'd have to grant them a variance. So it's a false reason. It stands for nothing. Very, very similar to the hidden reason that TEP has. The hidden reason is it's going to cost them big bucks. And you know, it struck me, I was the one that was protesting when TEP came, their attorney came before you earlier on a case that wasn't on the agenda as far as I know, and wanted the continuance. Because it became real obvious that TEP doesn't really care whether you give them a variance or not now. Because what they're going to do is they're going to get the city council to change the law and try to do away with undergrounding and scenic routes. That's the plan. So that's plan B, shall we say. Well, in Haynes, the other thing that happened is they said, well, look, we still have, you know, people that come here on foot, so we don't really need the parking. And the Court of Appeals said, well, that's not a good reason either. The first one was a made-up reason, but this reason is not a good reason either. This reason is just saying that, well, other restaurants don't have the same problem. But obviously they would. Obviously, other restaurants could have people that come there on foot. Well, we're still going to require them to do parking. So the problem here is very similar to what TEP is. The first reason was it's chimerical. The second reason is that it basically applies to everybody else. Now, for you to grant the variance, what you have to do is find out that there's something different here about this property than any other property in the same class in the same area. Well, let me tell you, you can go up and down the Santa Cruz River Valley Basin from Nogales to where Santa Cruz River ends, and you can find the same condition on all of the property that's there. We've had discussions already about Pima County Animal Control, and Mr. Milliken showed us those nice pictures of what they discovered there and so on. But what he didn't emphasize but they went ahead and built it, didn't they? Because they had to follow the protocols required by the state and the federal government to preserve and protect and give the respect to these remains or whatever they found there that is required now under law. And that exists whether you have a 404 agreement or anything else. They have to comply with the archaeological requirements that are in the federal and the state law. Now, somebody earlier mentioned the WAPA line. Now, TEP, and it's not coming out very clear in this hearing, but TEP, 300 to 400 foot away from where they're building this line, they're going to build another transmission line going right down the same, almost the same path. And they're going to be replacing poles and digging up and so on. And so the siting committee that they get their approval from, and this is called the WAPA line, they had to get approval from the siting committee for that. And the siting committee said, well, wait a minute, you're going to run into some archaeological problems here. So here's what you have to do. You have to report this to SHPA, the state. You have to report this to the federal people. If you run into something, you have to stop, and you have to have the archaeologists come in. You have to follow the protocol. You have to do what the law requires. And of course, everybody has to do that. Animal control had to do that. The people that build subdivision, if they didn't do it, then the city was derelict in their duty. How many subdivisions do we have along the same area where we have these artifacts that we have to be careful about? How many subdivisions do we have along the same area that undergrounded their electricity and paid for it and dug the trenches and did the things that they have to do and changed the drainage and did all of the things that they had to do in order to take care of this layer of civilization that has to exist too? Those are some of the questions that you folks should be asking yourself, because I'll tell you, this property is no different than many of the other properties. It's no different of the same properties and the class that this property is in. TEP hasn't establish this stretch of right-of-way is treated and should be treated any different from any other stretch of right-of-way. It is not established that other similar properties are not subject to having to deal with archaeological artifacts or flooding. Artifacts are all over. If you find them on your property, you must follow the procedure and report them. You must follow the protocol. So our memos that we gave you, and we do hope that you read them, the memos point out all of these things in detail. As a matter of fact, I don't know how many dozens of archaeological studies have been done before in the same general area, and we cite them in there, and we tell you what they are and when they happened from 1966 to the current time in this general area of other projects, sewer projects, other types of construction projects that have had to comply with the archaeological requirements and the protocol. TEP wants to be special. They don't want to have to comply with it. They would rather have everybody shed big tears about how, they want to preserve our ancestors, because they are our ancestors too. We live here. I was born here. I will tell you,
Mr. Baldwin, if I could just interrupt and ask if you could kind of come to a conclusion at some point soon. I anticipate we're going to have quite a number of people that will wish to speak, and the hour is getting kind of late. I don't want to cut you off. I just want to see if we can come to a conclusion at some point real soon.
I respect that, sir, but I want you to also respect the fact that I sat through 2 years of the 2 hours of the design review hearing. I sat through about an hour and a half of your last hearing where your board members didn't show up for the meeting, and it was continued. And I've sat through this time since 1 o'clock today, listening to the other side. So I'm going to get through it as quickly as I can, sir, but I do ask you to respect my rights too.
Okay, let's see if we can do that.
Thank you. The staff report is simply parroting what they've been told by TEP. And it really is disturbing when I hear the staff say, well, the design review board, which remember now was a 2-to-1 decision in favor of recommending a variance, was based on 4 conditions, but we can't pay any attention to those because they can't do those. Well, how about the members who voted in favor? Did they vote in favor because the conditions were a compromise? You bet they did. The previous design review board was at an impasse. Their vote was 2-to-2. So you don't have really any recommendation from them. Now you're going to hear a little bit more about the staff from me at the end of my presentation. And I hope it shocks you as much as it does me. But what you need to do right now is ask your staff, how is TEP property, how is this particular property deprived of privileges enjoyed by other property in the same class, in the same district? Explain to me how that is true. All the other properties are treated the same for the archaeology aspects or for the flooding. All the other property owners that dig must follow protocol for state archaeology and federal archaeology. All the other properties are treated the same as this property for TEP. The third reason now, and this reason is not in Haynes, this reason is that TEP now, they had other choices. They had other ways of designing the project, and they had other possibilities for even moving the project 200 or 300 foot to the east and combining it with their WAPA line that they're going to be changing and reconstructing and putting in new poles about the same time that they're going to be moving these lines. They planned through the Arizona Corporation Commission and the Siting Committee to put if you've noticed on the area down there, there's H-shaped poles, there's 2 poles, and then there's cross sections. That's the current WAPA line. That's 200 or 300, 500 feet at the most from the line that we're talking about today. They're going to replace that whole thing. They're going to put steel poles there. They could just as well move this over in that area. If they can't put them on the same poles, they could have put it in the same area. They didn't even bother to plan for that. As Denise has already pointed out, this is a fill job. So they aren't going to have to dig that deeply. They're going to have to dig less deeply, but they didn't even try to plan for that. And let me tell you another thing. As interesting as Mr. Milliken's report was, if you will read it, it's 60 pages, but if you read it, there's only 2 sentences about electric utilities. And that basically is, well, they'll have to monitor it as they go in. Of course they'll have to monitor. But the thing is, they have never planned from the get-go about undergrounding here. So TEP wants a special privilege now. We want to be treated differently because, gosh, we couldn't plan for this the way that might have avoided this whole thing. So what we have then is the first reason, TEP's hidden reason, not enough profit, too expensive to put underground, even though TEP has obscene profits this year. The first 6 months of the year, they made a net profit for their holding company, or for the company that owns them in Canada, of $86 million. Secondly, the archaeological artifacts and possible flooding. It could flood, you know, all these tributaries going down to the river, golly, like this is the only place in Tucson that we have that. It's not any different from any other property in Tucson. We all have voices that we have to contend with. The third thing is TE has created, by reason of choosing Silverbelt instead of the WAPA area where they could run it easily, they're asking now for a special privilege, not available to anyone else. Well, there's another reason. There's a fourth reason. And this one I couldn't believe. Phase one of this project was between Grant Road and Goree Road. It's completed now. And TEP was required by law, by the very section that you read initially, Mr. Chairman, section 5.3.9B, they were required to underground that section. Guess what? Somebody in the city of Tucson screwed up. They didn't make them do it. They didn't make them do it. So now you have TEP coming to you, and let me tell you, TEP knew damn good and well that they had to do it by law. They can read these ordinances just as well as you and I can. They're coming to you now, and we give you the legal argument on this in our memorandum, but sufficient to say, and I want to end this for you, as you said, sufficient to say they come to you now with unclean hands. Now, what that means in the law is that the person who's asking for relief from the court, in this case, the Board of Adjustment, and this theory applies to the Board of Adjustment, just like it does to the court. If the person coming to you has done something to create the problem, or has done something that was not lawful, and then he comes to you and asks you to fix it, you can't do it because they come to you with unclean hands. So here, they've already exempted themselves from one stretch, phase one. Now they want you to be sympathetic with them and exempt them from the application of the entire ordinance. Don't put any conditions on there. That would be terrible. Just flat condition, just exempt them from the whole thing. Mr. Chairperson and members, there is no basis for you to grant a variance to TEP in this case. Thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm glad we provided that time for you because you had a lot of information to provide us. Let me ask, who else would like to speak in opposition to this request? Is there anybody else that wishes to speak in opposition?
This is Steve Dolan. I raised my hand.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. But are you able to get on a video?
Yes. Here I am.
Okay.
I'm getting a ton of feedback. I'm not sure why. Let me turn some things off. Okay, go ahead.
Could you raise your right hand and you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I'm getting more feedback. I don't know where it's coming from.
Yeah, we can't deal with that feedback. If you can manage that, I would really appreciate it.
Mr. Dolan, if there's another person or anything else in the room that's streaming the meeting, that's probably causing feedback.
I don't know if that's it.
Well, I think I hear you. Why don't you? Your volume is not up really very loud now. It's really getting difficult.
Just a second. Just a second. You can go to another person if you want to come back to me.
Yes, I have somebody on the screen right now. Your audio off. Okay, thank you. And Ms. Whitaker, are you here to speak in opposition? I think you must hear that too. Let's give him a second or two here and see if that's permanent. Okay, Ms. Whitaker, would you raise your right hand? Yeah, right. Do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
You have to unmute Ms. Whitaker.
Yes, I do.
Okay, very good. Could you state your name and your address for us?
Yes, I'm Barbara Whitaker. I and Julie Sherrill own, and we live at 2745 West Placita Sombra Chula, right off Silverbelt Road. Our property goes to Silverbelt Road, and we're just north of Garay. So also I'm in Ward 1, and I served on the Citizens Task Force for the Silverbelt Road design. My intention is to show previous actions from the Board of Adjustment and the City of Tucson Council that justify not to approve the TEP variance. I will go over 3 points to this effect. In the past, when Silverbelt Road was widened from Grant to Congress, TEP electric lines were put underground. It is beautiful, and it sets a precedence. Number 2, the Tucson City Council designated 5 parcels of land on the west side of Silverbelt Road to be open space in approximately 2006. This happened with the help of 5 neighborhoods working together to support this action. It was later zoned open space, not just designated, but zoned open space due to the natural beauty of the roadway being the beginning of the west side, beginning the foothills of the Tucson Mountains. Silverbelt Road is a designated scenic road by law and is supported by Tucson City Council through those actions. Thirdly, in 2004, the City of Tucson sold land parallel to the golf course and Silverbelt Road to allow for the building of housing developments. So they sold part of the golf course to build housing developments. The developer at that point was Bill Estes. We even had him to our house with a neighborhood, Sombras del Cerro neighborhood meeting. That's our HOA and neighborhood association. He applied for variances at that time that resulted in houses being built closer to the road than allowed. There were 3 variances. Because it was so long ago, I can't tell you exactly each of the 3, but what happened, it allowed for high density housing. It allowed for, the Board of Adjustment did this. They approved these variances. And it allowed for the setback to be different so that those houses are closer to the road. And if any of the Board of Adjustment members have traveled this section of the road, you'll see they're pretty darn close. So with that in mind, so they were approved, those variances at that time. Bill Estes was approved to do all of that. He, by the way, agreed not to do any building. I don't know if it's the same developer now, it's been so many years ago, but he agreed not to do any building around that big section of the wash that has cultural elements, many cultural elements on both sides of the wash. I don't know what's happened with that now, but that was part of his agreement. Now with Silverbelt Road widening and TEP wanting new reconfigured power lines to go on the east side of Silverbelt, the new housing developments would be between high-powered TEP lines in front. It's really in their back of them, but right next to the road, and they would be closer than they would have originally had the Board of Adjustment at that time not approved those variances. So they have them on parallel to the road, closer to their houses. And then behind them, the high-powered WAPA lines that have been discussed. So they really are between a lot of electricity, you know, and it's really not healthy. There's been all kinds of studies about that, and it's not healthy. So what those neighborhoods are in for is even more electricity to give them harm. To say nothing of unsightly lines diminishing the view of the Catalina Mountains. So there are on the east side views too, even though it's flat land, as well as the hills of the Tucson Mountains on the west side. So the answer to that is to underground the lines. And I don't know which side of the road you do it, but part of that is to underground the lines. And the issue is that it's an ordinance that the scenic routes are protected. I think hearing the different Indian groups respond today was compelling. I'm sensitive to that because I'm very interested in Indian culture. But there is, you know, the road is a regional road, and it was decided by the powers that be that it be widened. Originally, our neighborhoods around here didn't even want the road widened because that affected the value, the scenic value, and the type of environment that we had. But the road is being widened to what it is now. It's being raised. They're changing drainage to deal with some of the watershed issues. I just, it's other decision makers that are affecting what our west side environment is. And I and our Sombras del Cerro neighborhood urge you to deny these variances. And I thank you very much.
Ms. Whitaker, thank you for your comments. I appreciate them. I'm going to ask now whether there's anybody else that wishes to speak in opposition.
This is Steve again. Can you hear me?
Yes, Steve, without the noise.
So I'm not too loud and I'm not having feedback?
No, that's working out for you, but I don't have you on video.
Here I am.
Okay, now,
so
would you raise your right hand? Before you say
I'll do
anything,
it again.
yes, please, do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And could you state your name and your address?
I'm Steve Dolan at 4154 North Tortolita in the Tucson Mountains. And before I get started, I'm curious how many of the Board of Adjustment members are still present.
Well, this is not really an opportunity for you to ask questions, but to provide us with testimony. I presume all the members are still here. Nobody has asked or indicated that they were leaving. They're all still very quiet, but I'm sure they're here.
Okay,
they're all
I was
present,
just wondering
Chairman Mark.
because I'm looking at the screen and I don't see very many names. Okay, I'll get started. Again, I'm Steve Dolan. I live in the Tucson Mountains. I've lived here and driven on Silverbelt Road for over 30 years. TEP wants new, taller poles with more wires that are bad for the scenic route. Thank you, Board of Adjustment, for this public hearing. TEP acts like a utility bully, ruining Tucson neighborhoods and scenic views with tall, ugly power poles. You, board members, have driven around Tucson or Silverbelt Road to see the unsightly poles. Do the right thing for Tucson and our neighborhoods, deny the variance, and set a good precedent for Tucson future views and underground poles along scenic routes. Fact, the TEP variance does not meet the UDC Scenic Corridor Zone purpose, quote, to protect the city's unique visual setting and promote its economic well-being. Performance standards are required to assure design sensitivity to the natural scenic quality. The variance request is so they don't meet that performance standard in a scenic corridor. And I want to share what others said. I respect and trust the tribes and their cultural resources. I do not trust TEP. TEP only explored the above ground poles option and gave no engineering reasons for the variance request. TEP listed two constraints, archaeology and floodplain. Archaeology investigations commonly occur for construction projects to identify and record the cultural resources, then cover them. Silverbelt Road is a fill project that will cover and protect the archaeology. Again, archaeology does not stop construction. An example is the Pima Animal Care Center that we talked about that was expanded and they had to comply with the archaeological rules. The other constraint, as a fill project, underground utilities will be out of the Santa Cruz River major floodplain, and at the new culvert crossings for tributary minor floodplains, underground utilities can be designed as is commonly done in the United States. TEP doesn't want to do it. And I'm surprised that Kevin of TEP gave the oath because in his findings and conclusions, there were a dozen lies. And the variance request, as Howard said, the variance request does not meet 5 of the 7 variance criteria as explained in written comments. Now, I had some trouble downloading some photos, so I'll just explain some. TEP wants to relocate poles to the east side of Silverbelt Road. There are currently no poles on the east side where most archaeological cultural resources are located. Proposed TEP poles would bore into those cultural resources. TEP also said the east side poles are needed to serve commercial properties. There are no commercial properties there. There's 4 TEP service lines to the west. There's none to the east. So those utility lines must be underground to serve what is on the east: Columbus Park, Pima Animal Care Center, Silverbelt Golf Course, and Silverbelt Crossing subdivision. They were talking about the WAPA line. Here's one of the photos. TEP plans a future site and a transmission line within that existing WAPA transmission easement. So TEP ignored an option to be out of the area of potential effects, to be out of the archaeology, and to be out of the scenic corridor. So they ignored that option to protect both cultural and scenic assets along Silverbelt Road. One option is it's going to be a fill project. They can go underground because it's going to be a fill project, and most of the artifacts are going to be preserved in place, as Ian was talking about, because most of the cultural assets are very, very deep. Okay, the other option, let's move all the TEP distribution poles 1/10 of a mile east to that existing WAPA transmission easement where TEP has the future site of a transmission line. And I will note that 1.3 miles north of Camino del Cerro, the existing TEP transmission line moves to the east to that existing WAPA transmission easement. Now, here's an interesting example. In 2008, for the Silverbelt Road widening from Ina to Cotaro, a large Hohokam village was discovered by archaeologists. The archaeologists worked side by side with the construction crew for underground utilities. There are no power poles along Silverbelt Road in that stretch from Ina to Cortaro. Underground can happen. Again, I said I respect and trust the tribes. I do not trust TEP. Please deny the variance and protect Silverbelt Road as a scenic corridor, not as a TEP transmission corridor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dolan. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak in opposition?
Yes, my name is Nora Alabado.
Do you have video available?
No, not at this time.
Okay, so I am raising my right hand. I'm asking you to do the same. And do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth?
I do.
And could you repeat your name and then give me your address?
My name is Nora Alabado. I reside at 3292 West Via Campana de Oro. Okay. And we are right at Avenida El Bor and Silverbelt.
Okay.
We submitted a letter to the Planning and Development Services Department along with the signature of 20 homeowners within the Campana de Plata subdivision. And we are opposed to TEP being granted a variance. They need to follow the law, and this will impact those of us who need to get out of the subdivision onto Silverbelt. We submitted a 10-page letter along with photos, and I hope you've had the opportunity to read our letter and take a look at the photos that were included. One area in particular is Silver Sun and Silverbelt. There have been a dozen accidents at this intersection because of the TEP pole, the 36-inch pole. And most cars have to go into the bike lane in order to see whether or not there are any oncoming vehicles. Where I live, if TEP decides to change out the pole right at the corner of Silverbelt and Avenida El Bor, we are going to have numerous accidents at that location. So with that said, I hope that the board decides to deny TEP's request for a variance at this time. I don't believe that they did their due diligence in figuring other ways to take care of this project that will affect everybody that is for and against this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wishing to speak in opposition? Hearing none, I want to invite the petitioner back and provide him with a few moments, as few as he can accommodate, to rebut comments that have been made up to this point, that so he can provide some clarification of the proposal in light of those comments.
Yes, Chair, thank you for the opportunity. I did see Ian had his hand raised. Would you like to address any of the comments pertaining to cultural resources? Also, your name was mentioned.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Mr. Chair, members of the board, I will be very brief. There are a lot of things that kind of were presented that maybe aren't entirely accurate. It's no fault of anyone's, because me, have a very strong familiarity with the process that goes into it. So to be very brief, I will say that this project is not TEP. TEP is not doing this project. They are being asked or directed to do this project. The cultural resources effort associated with this project and anything that would be impacted by TEP would be sponsored by the project, not by TEP. TEP's undergrounding and impacting utilities has no cost bearing on TEP. It would have an irreparable loss for the resource, but the cost would be taken in through the RTA project itself, number one. Number two, the thing that separates out this project is the federal 404 permit that governs this project. That is the distinguishing mark between the Animal Care Center, Segment 1, Congress to Grant. All of those projects were absent of a requirement that was an agreement, and that agreement is that the 404 permit that governs the project has a very specific condition that we must abide by the agreed upon historic properties treatment plan. That treatment plan was consulted on with 12 federally recognized tribes and 7 stakeholder agencies, all of which agreed that we would minimize and avoid our effects to cultural resources when at all possible. So therefore, this board has an option here, an option to go aerial and to maintain scenic values over heritage resources, or, that opposite here, it's late in the day, stay aerial and avoid cultural resources, or bury and impact cultural resources. This is an existing utility line. There is no way to use the fill of the project to bury that line because the fill is limited to the roadway construction. Then it tapers off. This new 15-foot wide utility trench would be going into native soils adjacent to the filled roadway. Those native soils are densely populated with ancestral remains. The example that Mr. Dolan gave of the project up by Cortaro, that resulted in the removal of over 300 ancestral remains. We do not want to replicate that project. We learn from those mistakes and we try to plan accordingly to avoid those types of impacts. There have been 10 years of design efforts gone into this project to minimize our harm to the significant cultural landscape that is here. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. No, I don't think we do. I think you've been clear. Mr. O'Brien.
Yes, sir.
Do you want to wrap it up?
Yes, I think Ian touched on a number of the key points, and
could I interrupt and could you get on video?
Yes. Yeah, is that coming through?
Yes.
There we go. Okay, so yes, Ian touched on a number of the key points, and I would like to just address a few of the other points that were raised. Mr. Baldwin, for example, cited cost as one of the primary reasons. Again, this is not one of the reasons that is being factored into our request for variance. He cited previous case law pertaining to a restaurant. Don't believe that's applicable to this case. There was numerous mentions of moving the line. I showed, and I will reshare this graphic to review briefly. Are you seeing that graphic of the?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so this shadow right here, this H-frame structure with the cross in it, that's a WAPA structure, Western Area Power Administration. This red line is a Tucson Electric Power 138 kilovolt lattice steel tower. There's electrical safety codes that govern how close in proximity electric lines can be to one another. And to be brief, there's not enough room to site our line between these. There's not enough room to set it to the west. And then if we were to move it further west, we would be intercepting private parcels with no existing TP, which would trigger the need for right-of-way acquisition. And so the request that we move an existing line to an area that we don't have rights is like asking somebody to move their house to a property that they don't own.
And Kevin, forgive me for jumping in. One other very key point is that all of these areas are outside of the federalized area of potential effects, and no TEP has no option of removing that line as part of this project outside of the area of potential effects. It is a requirement of the 404 permit that they remain in the area of potential effects.
Absolutely, absolutely true. And in addition, the line that runs along Silverbelt has 46 kV sub-transmission as well as distribution to serve homes. If we relocated the line over here, hypothetically speaking, just to entertain the notion, the lines, the service lines connecting back to service the homes along Silverbelt would be within the scenic corridor zone. We would either need to bury those lines, which would trigger the same constraints that we're faced with currently, or we would need to build overhead structures to accommodate those service lines, in which case we'd be outside of the scenic ordinance. So it's really not practical to suggest that we relocate an existing line into this WAPA corridor, which again, that is a WAPA corridor. It's not owned by TEP. There is a project planned to install structures there that TEP would have a circuit on, but we don't own that right away. We don't have any rights that would allow us to construct or relocate an existing power line into that corridor. It seems I can understand the rationale behind that suggestion, but it's not feasible for a number of reasons.
Let me ask, I don't know that you specifically responded to the comment one of the neighbors made. As I recall, the suggestion was that you relocate onto the WAPA line so that you would co-locate on that line. Is that an option for you?
That is not an option. That's going to be a double circuit 115 line, and co-locating the 46 kV as underbuild plus the distribution and communications is not a feasible design option. Besides the fact that it's outside of the APE, that would also trigger a number of maintenance challenges that WAPA, I can imagine, would not be in agreement with because of planned outages and just maintaining that number of lines on a single circuit. It also poses risks for reliability. Should that line go down, you're going to lose a significant amount of power to that area. So.
Okay. Well, I don't want to be too abrasive, but I'd like you to kind of wrap it up quickly if you can. I don't want to say at this very moment, but if you could do it quickly, that would be great.
Okay. Yes, and I'm seeing Mr. Dolan's illustration, and that is a sign that is posted. That's readily available for viewing at a number of locations throughout City of Tucson. I'd be happy to provide those locations. But so yeah,
that's where you need to co-locate.
Okay, one at a time. And Mr. Dolan, we're beyond your time, so please, no further input. Mr. O'Brien, the floor is yours still.
Yeah, so I think a number of those points that were raised, looking at alternatives, again, were touched on by Mr. Milliken, addressing the fill. There was multiple mentions of this is a fill project. There's going to be 10 feet of fill, just bury the lines in the fill, et cetera. That's just not a practical and feasible design option. There's not that much fill. That's incorrect. And there's not an option to bury the voltages of transmission, sub-transmission, distribution, communications lines in that fill volume per that road prism engineering design. And that has been considered and discussed at length through the DRB meetings, which the DRB meeting did approve and recommended approval of the variance. I was also mentioned that the DRB approved it by a vote of 2-1. If I'm not mistaken, it was a unanimous vote for approval. And so I think in the interest of time, I will wrap it up. I think, Ian touched on really the crux of this matter, and the key to this variance application for our consideration is that, again, this is not a TEP project. We have an existing power line along Silverbelt Road, and we're adjusting and accommodating this project to the best of our abilities through the course of a lengthy design process. And I really appreciate all your time, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I understand that this is a complex project. It has a number of stakeholders well beyond TEP and significant implications for the regional growth and development of the City of Tucson, which we're happy to be part of. And again, I appreciate your time and consideration of this important matter, and ask that the focus be on not only the 7 findings of the variance, but the circumstances and conditions that pertain to this project area. It's a unique and amazing area, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I think that's coming from Mr. Dolan.
It's coming from Mr. Baldwin.
Mr. Baldwin? Oh, okay. I'm going to ask the board members if they have any questions for anybody that has just spoken, or if not, I'm going to close the hearing and go to the phase of discussion and a motion. Are there any such questions on the part of any board members? Hearing none, I'm going to close the hearing, and I want to ask board members that if they wish to discuss the matter, this is the time. If one wishes to make a motion, this is the time.
Mr. Chair, this is Roy Lusk with the City Attorney's Office. May I speak?
Yes.
I just wanted to let the board know that obviously we're late in the hour, and let the board know that it is possible to take the matter under advisement if the board wishes to. I do know that Mr. I apologize, that one of our board members was not present for the entire presentation, and you could also take a recess to allow that board member to view the presentation prior to voting. Those are both options available to you, but it's entirely up to the board to do so.
So let me ask a legal question, and that is, the board member who was absent for some period of time, if there was a motion made at this point, would that board member be free to vote on the case?
I think it would be appropriate for that board member to abstain, having not heard all of the evidence.
Okay, okay. I'm speaking to the board members at this point. We have the option of taking the matter into consideration under advisement and rendering a decision at a future date. Or if we have a motion, if one of the members wants to make a motion now, we can consider that. And I want to open it up to the board members. Ms. Kubish, did you have something to say?
No, Mr. Chairman, there's a lot of good points that have been made by both sides. And I have no questions for either side. I think they've told us quite a bit already.
Are you in a position to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not.
Okay. Mr. Huerta, are you here? I'm asking, is Mr. Huerta here?